Hello and welcome to Nightmare Tonight. My name is David Stockdale. I'll be your host on this excursion into the dark unknown. In this episode, I have with me Ian from the YouTube channel Epoch Philosophy. I think we had a great conversation, mainly surrounding the issue of happiness, which is the subject of his most recent video essay. So, it might be a good idea to check out that video prior to listening to this. I'll have a link in the show notes. And if you're listening to this at the time of its release, I should have some more good stuff out for you soon. And here's the episode. So the reason I wanted to talk to you, I've been meaning to touch base with you for a while because I think your videos are great. You do a lot of great primers on different thinkers and different books that are right in my wheelhouse, and I think my audience would really like your stuff. So, if you're listening to this, check out Epoch Philosophy. But the main reason I wanted to talk to you at this point is because you have a video about happiness, and this is a topic that has been of interest to me as of late. Specifically, I guess I would, or the way I would like to frame it is that there's like a fetishism of happiness in late capitalism. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, and that's definitely right. I think it's a good way. I've never really used the language of a fetish towards happiness, but that's probably the most accurate way to describe it. But it's a very ideological fetish, right? It's I would say it's like a definitely like an artificial thing that has been socially just stretched through history, and especially Western history. And I think there's this sort of godlike goal of this weird state of happiness that no one can really seem to pin down exactly what it is. And then two, when you really try to scrutinize it and try to, pick it apart, you realize real quick, it's like, oh shit, I don't know, maybe happiness really shouldn't be the goal. And I think someone like Zizek articulates that probably almost better than anyone, actually.
I definitely want to talk to you about Zizek. But let's start off with this sort of I find it to be paradoxical, even at the individual level, that when you chase happiness, what happens is you often end up sort of comparing yourself to some ideal version of what you think life should be, and the effect of that is that you end up not satisfied, because you're constantly comparing yourself to a fairly idealistic notion, right? What do you think?
Yeah. So, no, that's right. I think as far as like happiness and chasing happiness, I think it's something that we all like think about. I've certainly sort of thought about and actually struggled with. I've not only like struggled with like everyone goes through bouts of depression or sadness or whatever it is. But then you're fixated on happiness right afterwards, or am I as happy as I could be? And it's a lingering question that in some ways, one of the biggest threats to this quote unquote happiness is the idea of happiness itself. You sort of chase this little sublime object, and you can't ever get a hold of it. And it's like, if anything, if we can, in my mind, if we can reconcile with a state of happiness in some ways, it would be rather trying to be in line with the goal or the journey to a state of happiness. That should be your focus, right? It's like, look, like do things that make you joyful, and go through the process of doing those things. And that process is what you should look at, not that final state, the stagnant, really weird ideological state that we call happiness that really doesn't really exist. So yeah, in many ways, I think that it's sort of a cathartic thing, right? It's scary to hear that, like, oh, happiness is not the goal. You shouldn't be happy. You tell a lot of people that initially, they're like, well, what the fuck? Like, then what the fuck's the point? It's like,
Yeah.
well, it doesn't, like, what the point is doesn't matter, actually. And in my mind, you know, I think that's a really freeing idea, that you shouldn't be happy. Like, that, in my mind, that's, if anything, that takes a burden, a load off my shoulders. Personally, that was the personal feeling I felt when I really started to really internalize that sort of newer theories of happiness from people like Zizek, or taking a psychoanalytic viewpoint of happiness. And I quite liked it, and I completely agree with that. And it's actually a useful thing, I think, to talk about.
Totally. And I guess the you sort of touch on this at the beginning of your video, but also you drive home like this a point that I think needs to be reiterated more and more, which is that, like, our idea of happiness doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is situated in this particular historical moment. And what you touch on at the beginning of the video is, I think, social media, right? Social media sort of informs our expectations with respect to what kind of life we should be living, because we see all of these different representations of people on social media. And of course, people are giving us a very selective understanding of what their life is like, right? So it gives us a sort of unrealistic goal with respect to what we think we should be doing.
Right. So I actually think, well, so that's completely correct, right? Like, you see people on Instagram or whatever, and they're posing next to a car that they don't even own, and it's like a fucking $1 million car or whatever. And that's a big thing. Or people try to project a simulation of a certain lifestyle that really isn't even attainable at all, no matter how rich or how well connected you are. It's completely fake. It's fantasy, and that's certainly harmful. I will say, though, I think it's kind of a good thing. I think most people are actually skeptical enough to sort of understand that reality and phenomenon within social media. I think that's a thing that a lot of people actually know. What I actually think that a lot of people don't realize, with as far as media, including social media, is that what I see is, I see, like, one of the biggest things in my mind that contributes to a state of, like, unhappiness today. So, like, my video was sort of partitioned into two parts, right? The first part, I was talking about how, like, we are sort of unhappy as a society right now, right? Like if we can measure happiness, which in some ways that there are institutions that try to do that. And I showed some statistics and stuff like that beforehand, and suicides going up, all of these things. We seem to be, according to our definition of happiness, pretty unhappy, and in a little bit of a unique state in history as we speak. And so, I talked about sort of like, okay, we are unhappy, and then what are some of those things, those markings in the first half of the video? What are those markings that make us unhappy, or all that stuff? I think we are actually good as a society right now to point out the immediate harmful effects of social media. It's new enough that we are able to sort of pick at it. Like, even the most uncritical people are able to do this, and I think that's good. But one thing that I think about is a sort of overwhelming of the senses, right? Or an overwhelming of sort of ideological narratives, right? So one thing that I talk about with media, and this is an especially big problem even with independent media, if not it's gotten worse, is that there are infinite modes of narratives that you can subscribe to now. And these narratives are seemingly valid in some ways, right? And it's such a sensory overload that what we're dealing with today, as far as ideology goes, or news analyst, everyone's a commentator nowadays. Everyone's an analyst. Everyone can pick up a microphone. That what happens is you have these thousands of different nodes of these slightly different takes, and I think now one thing that contributes to this unhappiness, I think, is confusion, and I would call this kind of like postmodern confusion.
I definitely identify with that. Just like the proliferation of, these commodified hot takes.
Mm-hmm.
It's over the course of, I think, maybe the past 4 or 5 years or so, it has really made me into a more cynical person. And, I don't like that. I don't like being cynical,
Right.
But there is this like pervasive kind of lifestyle marketing too that tends to depict a very superficial image of a happy life. And that's not a new thing, right? Like it's the culmination of advertising trends that have been going on for probably over 100 years at this point.
Right.
But I do think as pressure on the working class increases due to macroeconomic trends, namely like the decoupling of wages with productivity, I think we're seeing, maybe it would be fair to say, like an acceleration of this kind of lifestyle marketing. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So, well, absolutely. I completely agree. So you kind of touch on theory a lot with this channel. You have a little bit of an applied form of theory, which is really cool. I love art and cinema and film criticism quite a bit, and I think it's really useful. But I would point to, I think, one person who kind of points out this newer state of capitalism that we are in is Baudrillard, and early Baudrillard, right? We think of Baudrillard as like simulacra, simulation, the Matrix, all that shit. And that's late Baudrillard, and it's still good stuff. But early Baudrillard kind of talks about how we've hit a point in this 20th century capitalism where, namely post-World War II capitalism, where we've kind of mastered production, right? Like production is like, damn, we're good at it now, right? We've had a couple hundred years of capitalism to develop, and the modes of production have, expanded quite rapidly. Now what we're dealing with is a mode of consumption within capitalism. So the new thing is like advertising. We know how to produce commodities. The thing is, we need to know how to sell them. We need to know how to create lifestyles, and this is exactly where Baudrillard kind of created the thing sign value, right? Where, or even Lyotard went into things like libidinal economy, right? Where instead of like political economy and the sort of Marxist, immediate classic Marxist notions of political economy, I still find people like Baudrillard Marxist. They're just more later Marxist.
Mm-hmm.
We're now dealing with an economy that goes around signs, right? You buy a car not because of its functional value, right? Its immediate use case. I mean, certainly you do. It gets you to A to B. But I mean, man, look at the emergence of the 50s and 60s. Cars had tail fins on them that actually hurt aerodynamics. And we started spending money on these signs, right? These status symbols within objects. And in his book, The System of Objects, he goes into that. And I think nowadays, right, in our contemporary capitalism, I mean, it's even worse, and it's easier. It's easier to manufacture, right? Like back then, making a car is difficult, or making objects and commodities that sort of had this lifestyle thing to it that you could identify with. Certainly, physical objects, require some labor and intensity and stuff, whether you're making a T-shirt or whatever. Nowadays, it's like digital, right? So, what is it? Oh God, what is it? Who just sold virtual shoes? Is that Gucci? You know what I'm talking about? Where you take your phone and you show your camera towards your feet, and you can buy for $6, and it'll give you it'll put a hologrammed version of shoes on your feet or something like that, but it costs you like $6. So now we're getting to a point in an economy today where signs and symbols are so easily manufactured in the digisphere that it's, I'm not exactly sure what the consequences are of this, but weird stuff's happening, and I think weird stuff's going to continue to happen, to say the least.
I think that's a fair statement, and it's really tricky when you get into this, right? Because you're alluding to the manner in which capitalism has to create new desires,
right?
And But even as we have, obviously the thing that people refer to as the middle class, that is shrinking. There is an increase in the working poor. So people increasingly just can't afford shit. And I find that with that sort of trend, we are seeing the aestheticization of like minimalism.
Yeah.
So you can even sort of create the desire for a lack of commodities.
Dude, 150%. That's, yeah.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah, that's, that's truly, I think we are at the absolute height of like really weird ideological modes of being. I mean, ideology, whether that be within religion or whatever, has existed forever. But man, we are on like ideology on steroids, right? And no, minimalism is that, right? I find minimalism incredibly ideological in so many ways. And it's not to say like minimalism isn't like good in some ways. Like I actually understand I'm a bit of a neat freak myself. I understand the want for minimalism, but obviously there's a sort of larger abstract shift towards minimalism because it's reflective of the very materiality that the working class has to deal with. And our current state of materiality is really low wages and really a lot of financial scarcity in a lot of ways, and people can't afford things. Labor organization is just almost non-existent in the United States nowadays. And it's a tragedy. But yeah, our economy has to refocus. It has to try to find ways to get past that. And capitalism's better at that than anything, right? We have. I think one of my biggest things when I was first getting into theory is that it made me look at things so differently. And capitalism was one of those beasts that I looked at differently. I think traditional leftists, they sort of look at capitalism as this steel, this very rigid and steel, inflexible like object or like train that just like runs everything over, and it's just like it's supremely authoritarian and all of that. That's not really capitalism, right? It's actually worse in some ways, right? Capitalism is this flexible system that consumes its own critiques. It thrives, not only consumes its own critiques, capitalism thrives off its own critiques, right? There's a reason why in capitalism we don't have the same form of quote unquote propaganda we saw in Nazi Germany or China or other forms of economics. Instead, we have a much more elusive propaganda. It's arguably way more pervasive than those. Capitalism seems to sort of shift and remold to things. And right now, capitalism is having to contend with the fact that people can't afford shit, and it's trying to figure out ways. And what better way to do that than completely change sort of mindsets and sort of maybe material expectations. And I think a shift towards minimalism is a really, really damn good idea.
Yeah, and the propagation of tiny homes too, right?
Oh, yeah.
It coincides with this sort of immiseration of the working class. So you alluded to, we know that depression and suicide are on the rise. I think it's getting to the point where even like the managerial strata of society has taken notice simply due to its effects on productivity. A chronically depressed population, that might be good for the pharmaceutical industry, but it's not good for the bottom line in general, right?
Right, absolutely.
This is sort of why I've taken an interest in this subject. It's I've been casually, I think I mentioned to you when we first started to talk that I've been casually reviewing an online course called The Science of Well-Being, which originates out of Yale. And while there are definitely some like useful insights, I can't help but I can't escape the suspicion that this is like a management strategy that exists for the maintenance of workers in capitalism. Like it doesn't exist to make people more fulfilled, whatever that means. It exists to just keep people going so that they can work.
Right. And, and maybe it's I would say that the main ideological function is certainly to keep people in line and stuff like that. Although they do that by keeping people fulfilled in a very artificial way, right? It's the man, if there's one thing that's for sure about capitalism, it doesn't work in totalities. There's, if anything, capitalism's a system of multiplicities, and it does a lot of different things. And yeah, I mean, shit, these things, like what you're talking about is, an entire sort of really bad state of mental health for a lot of workers. Well, we can keep them in line and at bay, and then also sort of try to ideologically kind of shift their focus towards other objects and things, right? And ideas and lifestyles.
Yeah. One thing I found interesting about this course is there's this oft-cited little factoid that, income and happiness correlate with one another, but only up to a certain point. And once you get beyond that point, you don't get any happier with the higher income. And I think it's like $75,000 a year.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And, that's cited all over the place. But when the lecturer talks about this in The Science of Well-Being, she's talking to a room full of students at Yale. So she goes, none of you are going to have any issue making $75,000 a year. You're going to be fine on that front. And I was just thinking to myself, like, yeah, what about the rest of us?
Yeah, no, I mean, $75,000 a year is a lot of money in a lot of ways. Well, it's not actually. 75,000, objectively. I mean, in so many ways, dude, I could fucking blow through $75,000 so fast.
Yeah.
So fast. And not even like on like really luxury shit, right? Like stuff is expensive as fuck nowadays. But yeah, no, nonetheless, yeah, I mean, there is sort of an irony talking about like well-being within a room full of fucking Yale students and stuff like that. And there's an entire, oh God, entire world outside of that, to say the least. I can only imagine what kind of experience it would be to even go to a Ivy League school and sort of sit and watch people like how it goes about. I have a little bit of a weird experience with that. Matter of fact, I went to community college my first 2 years, and then I transferred to a very sort of regionally prestigious private school. And it was terrible. It was the worst fucking place on earth. And I noticed, man, just looking around, I was such a fucking outcast. These people were the most, like you could tell, like supremely rich kids.
Yeah.
Like not even, it's not even like, you see rich, people, there's wealthy people wherever you go, right? There's people who, and they sort of blend in and shit. No, not here. Not at all. And, man, I noticed something else that was really weird. I came from a community college where it was all walks of life of people, and that's more of a comfort to me than it is like, anything else. And here, man, I noticed not only that, there was like fucking out of it was a small school, but about 1,000 people, but I saw new people every day on campus. So it didn't seem that small. I saw maybe 2 people of color out of thousands of people I saw. It just felt really artificial and weird. So no, I mean, when you're looking at like, educated people and stuff like that, it can't, like, I don't know, there's some supreme irony about that. There is such a division of sort of class-like sort of phenomenon, and then there's, the ideological like impetus to get away from your own sort of roots of poverty or whatever, that it, people who are actually still poor will try their hardest to not look poor, and vice versa. It's like we live in the most weirdly confused state that I could even think of,
Yeah. So in your video, you mention the Steven Pinkers of the world. So for those of you who don't know, Steven Pinker is a psychologist. I think his specialty is linguistics, right?
I don't know. I don't know much about Steven Pinker, actually, other than that he wrote the Better Angels of Our Demons.
Right.
Is that right?
And so his take on this is like Americans suffer from an optimism gap. So basically he thinks we should be happier than we are based on various data points. And he bolsters this with all sorts of graphs showing that, like, for instance, violent crime has gone down.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fair enough. He also points out Americans have more leisure time than ever before. I would question that one. I'm not sure about that.
Me too. Yeah.
But what do you think is the problem with this perspective?
Well, oh God, there's so many, right? So even he's starting from, again, like we were talking about earlier, he's starting from the impetus that like, oh, we should be happier when no, like that's what when the first thing we started this little podcast thing is like, no, we were talking about happiness isn't the goal. So there's that,
Right.
but even that's tiny compared to sort of the other larger questions and stuff. It's like again, this is where I even find issues with sort of a purely analytical approach, right? So So I noticed my experience. Analytical philosophers love Steven Pinker, and I don't mind analytical philosophy. I actually quite like it in a lot of ways. I'm into continental philosophy and theory. That's where my heart is. But I think that the antagonism between the two is ridiculous. But what I do notice is that analytics getting into the realm of pure sort of number crunching as to sort of mold your perspective can become really ideological very, very fast because it doesn't tell the whole story, right? It's, we should, Steven Pinker talks about, violent crime going down and that's true, actually. I think I've heard that like even from the 80s, like violent crime has gone down, but it doesn't matter, right? I think the thing is that stuff is still bad. And not only is stuff still bad, it's a quite simple formula. Stuff isn't too good right now, and that's fine, but we should be working to fix this. And then two, I don't think we should be content until there is like nothing perceptibly wrong with stuff. And that'll probably never happen. The goal isn't to, hey guys, sort of level yourselves here. Maybe we can say like, hey, like let's be thankful of things we don't have to deal with, that, in the past history we had to, and that's fine, sure. But like there are so many unique problems today that it doesn't even help to just be like, oh, hey, like, like it's not that bad. Like back in my day, there was like, people getting gunned down the streets, which they still do today. But it's just sort of weird. I noticed there's a very ideological tint to how people talk about things that like Steven Pinker does. And it doesn't get at the totality of a lot of human experiences. And that experience being today that we're dealing with a lot of really bad economic shit with workers. We're dealing with a very weird postmodern interaction with the world, right? I talked about that in my happiness video where, again, historicity is gone. Maybe there's a Mark Fisher tone. I don't know if you've talked about Mark Fisher on here,
Oh, yeah.
but we can't recognize the future. The future's sort of suspended. Art is being recycled. We don't have any hope for the future, right? We don't hope that there will even be creation because we live in such a commodified system. True creation is stifled. It's not profitable enough to truly create things. So we're dealing with such abstract, weird things going on that goes so far beyond immediate analytics that analytics are important, right? I think that's fine that Steven Pinker is pointing this out, but he doesn't contend with the other realm of human perception and interaction.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really shallow analysis. Also, I'm pretty sure he's like on the Epstein flight logs or something like that.
Probably. Fucking.
So his notion of happiness might be different from ours.
Oh yeah, to say the least, I'm sure.
But even from like an analytical perspective, you can criticize this because he's begging the question. This is classic question begging exercise he's basically front loading his understanding of happiness into the argument.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's definitely, again, it's just supremely shallow. I think and it's hard to get at the totality of a situation, right? Like what we're talking about here, we couldn't ever try to prescribe something or try to define something in its totality. And there are, in many ways, nodes of human experience, and we can try to connect those experiences together to come at a more full picture. But I find that there is a huge rejection of even trying to do that with people like Steven Pinker. It's very, very rapidly closed off and shallow in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So I noticed a sort of tension in your video between sort of material way of viewing things, the traditional Marxist perspective, and the more like Hegelian understanding. And, I kind of grapple with this. I'm not even sure where I land on it. the sort of libertarian Marxists have always kind of resonated with me. The people who emphasize freedom, right?
Right.
And I do think if we were able to overcome capitalist alienation, it might give us the opportunity to actually discover for ourselves what happiness means to us. I think then we can begin to have that dialectic.
Right.
But you also talk about Hegel and his notion of unhappy consciousness, right? Which you mainly discuss in reference to the way people relate to institutions. Would you mind briefly explaining that concept as you see it?
Yeah. So, so it kind of goes into sort of the separation of Hegel's commentary on alienation and Marx's commentary on alienation. I assume most people know Marx's sort of commentary on alienation. Alienation, this sense of sort of a lack of meaning comes from the labor process and the division of labor being separated into little menial jobs, and you don't own the totality of your work and stuff like that. And that's the Marxist notion of alienation. And in my mind, it's very correct in a lot of ways. I think Marx is a little bit more narrow with his approach, but allows him to be a little bit more presciently accurate. And I think that's why Marx is so good at just, at sort of elaborating on the harmful effects of the labor process. But Hegel's a bit more broad. And so I think that because he is more broad, we might be able to use Hegel in a little bit more of a flexible way, maybe, or in ways where he relates to a lot more things than what we would initially think of. There's a very, I think, an ideological Marxist tendency to just write off Hegel or to be extremely combative. I think these are, a lot of Marxist people who read Marx too. It's not like they're like the online simulacrum of Marxists who fetishize violence and all that stupid shit. But these people, you see, when you read the German ideology, especially part one, Marx and Engels are pretty fucking aggressive and combating. They're sassy, man, when they're talking about Hegel.
I love it.
Yeah, and that's fine, especially when like Hegel was that was the dominant thinker in their day and age. German idealism was the dominant thing. So I suppose, being a little bit combative and say like, God damn it, you guys don't get at the totality, and the totality is rooted in material. Well, and that's great, but I still think German idealism is wonderful in a lot of ways. So what Hegel talks about with alienation essentially is that there's almost an existentialism to it, where you're in this world as a subject, as a person. You weren't asked to be born there, and you look around you, and there's this artificiality to things, right? Religious institutions. There's these huge constructs with rituals and sort of an interaction of symbolism and all these things, and you realize like, holy fuck, man, this doesn't feel like I feel alien to this. This is weird, and I don't like it. And Hegel essentially tries to elaborate on this as a human experience, and people feel different to these institutions. They feel alien to them. And in my mind, I'd like to think that that form of alienation can kind of be useful to examining populism and waves of populism. I think if anything, populism happens in waves in history. And I think Hegel's idea of alienation can help explain populism, whether it be right-wing populism or left-wing populism. It's a rejection of certain institutions at bay because you feel alien, you feel different to it, and it doesn't feel like you're a part of it. You feel completely separate. Now, the rest of Hegel's commentary on that, I didn't talk too much about it. Hegel sees that these actually, this is good because there's in Hegelian terminology, there's a dialectic of recognition. You can only recognize yourself from the things that are different from you. And the fact that you are separate from these institutions, it can sort of mirror yourself, and you can see how I am a unique spirit or subject. And that you can recognize yourself fully, and so this difference within institutions actually kind of good. But then he talks about through that dialectic recognition, you actually end up recognizing that these institutions aren't that different from you. You, like other people, actually make up these institutions as well. So it's a little bit of a weird movement with Hegel and his idea of alienation, but that's essentially kind of it.
I always love when people accurately talk about Hegel. What is always conveyed is this fluid, dynamic process. Just for viewers, like where would one start with Hegel? if they wanted to read more about this?
With Hegel, he's so broad, and I'm not a Hegelian scholar at all. And I can accurately talk about some concepts within Hegel, but I haven't really contended with a lot of the text of Hegel. He's actually one of those theorists I'm a little bit scared to, as a lot of people are.
Yeah, he's notoriously difficult to read.
He's stupidly difficult to read. Nonetheless, I will get to him, but what I suggest to people is even before you get into Marx, go read an introduction book into Hegel, which I've read 2 introduction books into Hegel. It's actually quite nice. Peter Singer, I don't know much about Peter Singer's thought. A lot of people dislike Peter Singer. Anyways, he wrote a book about Hegel. He doesn't talk about anything about himself or his own theories and stuff, but he wrote an introduction book into Hegel, and it's phenomenal. Really kind of helped me probably about like a year ago, really tried, really to understand Hegel in a better sense. So I suggest people when you're approaching Hegel, I really would read an introduction book into Hegel. Almost try to understand his modes of thoughts and theories, such as like dialectics, then go into the text. And I haven't even gone really deep into the text. I have the Encyclopedia of Logic, and I have the Phenomenology of Spirit, but I've yet to read them, to be honest. I think a lot of people kind of are surprised by that, but I have yet to read Hegel explicitly.
You sort of alluded to this earlier. This form of alienation that is Hegelian as opposed to Marxist. Is this an inherent condition of human life? Is that what's being conveyed here? Like it's just inescapable?
That's a good question. I don't know, really. I really, truly, do you? I don't know if you see this. I like existentialism quite a bit. Don't you see sort of an existentialism to this? Like I see that this is sort of beneficial to thinkers like de Beauvoir and like Sartre, where it's like it's a question of like individual subjectivity, right? Like, man, like is this real or not, or like is this our innate nature? And I don't really know that, man. I think these ideas are applicable enough that we can say that like we can use these concepts, the language around it, to make sense of our reality, whether metaphysically speaking, whether that's our innate core nature. I don't know. I think in our happiness video I talked about we don't necessarily have to take Hegel's metaphysics seriously around alienation to see the usefulness and as a mode of language to explain what's going on around us, right? So yeah, I wish I could answer that better than that, but I don't really know, man. That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't really. When I ask things like that, I don't really expect a concrete answer. It's kind of a extremely broad and deep question. I guess the way I look at it is, I think Marx is basically right that the thing that distinguishes people from other animals is that we are able to remake the world through production. And I guess the way in which I think Hegel is useful is when you are trying to remake the world through production, it's never going to turn out the way you intend totally, right? There's never going to be 100% fidelity there in terms of your intentions mapping onto reality. Like a simple anecdote would be like, I've been kind of dabbling in computer programming a little bit with Python. I'm kind of interested in web development as well. And when you're trying to figure something out, and this kind of relates to what Zizek is saying about happiness, the problem-solving process when you're trying to figure something out in programming can be like excruciating and miserable. And me personally, I tend to get obsessed when I'm trying to solve a problem, and it sort of consumes my life, at least for that particular moment.
Same.
Once you solve it, there's like a kind of ecstasy that happens. You just like things start to click. That feeling when things click, it's you're maybe not, your intentions maybe aren't mapping 100% onto reality, but you've made some kind of progress, right?
Right.
That's where I think Hegel is useful. This like Hegelian notion of alienation. You're never going to completely 100% get everything right. You're never going to have an accurate picture of reality because it's incomprehensible. It's too complex for humans to really fully grasp. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling. Sorry.
No, 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 no. That's okay. No, I think that's right. And there's a Hegelian tonality to that, right, where it's overcoming contradictions and problems and stuff like that. There's a dialectical conflict, you and trying to figure something out, and when you overcome that contradiction in a dialectical form, yeah, it feels good in a lot of ways, and that's very true. So I think in so many ways, Hegel, you know, whether we have to take Hegel's metaphysics at 100%, it isn't really the point. I noticed that a lot of explicitly Marxist people will say that, and they're like, "Man, Hegel's an idealist and all this shit." And I really hate that. It's theory isn't a guideline and religious rule book to how things are. Rather, they're ideas and forms of language that can help give context to things. I think Hegel is better at giving context to things than a lot of theorists. So yeah, no, I think that's right. I'm the same way. I get a little bit obsessed with things, and well, to say the least, I go any interest that I have, I go kind of balls to the wall, and I I don't do it halfway at all. Unless I really hate it, like if I'm forced to do something like work or like a job that I don't like, oh dude, I don't do that at all. Like I don't take that seriously. But any interest of mine, oh yeah.
Yeah, and you are fully committed to YouTube. It seems you're like a machine, man, pumping out these videos, and they're quality videos. It's not like you're just churning them out. Yeah, I'm impressed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm really critical of myself with YouTube, so I do appreciate hearing that. It actually really does help. I'm extremely critical of my own work, but yeah, I try to make the most high quality videos that I possibly can that are easy to understand yet not insulting to people who already have learned or read these texts, and they're supposed to. I really just want it to be helpful. There's oh God, there's such a vacuous like nature of the internet and content creation. One of the biggest things that I see, and I come from a political background, right? My major and my two majors are political science and history, and I came from a very explicit political viewpoint before I really got into theory. I ended up realizing philosophy and theory helps answer political questions way better than things like political science or like these really weird abstract YouTube channels talking about online bullshit. And yeah, one of my things is right now is there is right now we are really like at the height of like entertainment as information. And it's not to say that like you shouldn't be entertained by information, but it's like the content these YouTubers or content creators, they will prioritize that entertainment before anything else. You talked about this in your video, the spectacle of debate. That's incredibly prescient. Like, oh my god, dude, debate culture on the internet is fucking horrendous. It's not. I mean, there's nothing cooperative about it. I'm a pretty big believer that like, look, I don't know, what our core being is, our metaphysics, but what I am just about sure of is that it isn't our mode of metaphysics being competition and sort of rigid separation of people. Our metaphysics, if anything, I don't know exactly what our metaphysics are, what our core state of nature is, but it sure as fuck is more in line with cooperation and a non-alienating form of communication. And so, man, I'm really trying to, for people who are really interested and really kind of, taking the time to sort of, man, learn a little bit of philosophy. You don't have to go crazy like me or anyone else, but if hey, I want to be familiar with some of the text, some of the works. It's an enriching thing, which it absolutely is. It's changed my life. I want to be able to help people with that, and I take it super seriously. Another thing is I'm almost done with school, and so I'm in a little bit of a conundrum. So, this is a good side gig for whenever I'm in university. It's my last semester. I'm almost done. Perfect for being in university. It's like my YouTube channel is a full time job. It doesn't pay it. So it's really weird. Like I'm in a state where like the next few months it's make it or break it for this YouTube channel, which actually kind of sucks to hear. Um, but like I either do this full time. I could never have a full time job where I work 40 to 50 hours a week, after school and then or after, and then go home from work and make these kind of videos. I couldn't do it. So, I am focusing a lot on quality. I want to be able to hopefully I'm going to make this a push to do it full time, probably within about a month. And So yeah, there's also I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder to be able to keep this thing sustained because if it doesn't work out like that, I won't be able to keep making content. So it's a little bit of a weird situation. I wish I had a YouTube channel where there were like really easy videos to make and I could just sort of like, after work go talk for an hour or do whatever and then, but no, these are kind of like quasi film like things.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, a good portion of the production time is probably just reading the reading material, right?
Yeah, I can actually, I've never really told people my work formula. I guess I can sort of elaborate on that. I script and then I do dialogue, I do voiceover, and then I go edit on Premiere and After Effects. But a lot of people ask me like, how the fuck do you read? So some days, very rarely, I don't do this very often. Some days I will read, during the day, I'll read here and there for an hour or so. But mainly what I do is every night before I go to bed, I read about an hour and I read X amount of pages, and that's actually it. You can actually get through way more books than what you would imagine with that. Oh God, this past year, I've probably read like 15, 20 books. And then, but there's also, to everyone that the knowledge wouldn't stick as well as it does for me because I have to translate this into a video. Some people say like, oh, you want to learn something, teach it. That's very true.
Totally.
So putting it into a video form really allows you to internalize it. So I'm lucky on that regard. But yeah, no, you don't have to spend that much time reading to really get through some text. Surprisingly, I do it before bed. I notice that's the best way for me.
Yeah, I wish you the best of luck with the channel. I know it is a tricky, unpredictable terrain, being a YouTuber.
Oh yeah.
But for what it's worth, I think the amount of support you have amassed in a relatively short amount of time should indicate to you that this project has potential, like major potential.
Yeah, thank you. I hope so. I really do. I'm confident in a lot of ways as well. I appreciate that. But when you're in your seat, there's always this anxiety. I don't actually talk about that a lot. I bet a lot of people probably, because I do think my videos are fairly high quality, but I feel like a lot of people probably think that I'm coasting through this. And I'm like, fuck yeah, I got 17K subs. And as you with someone like 53K subs, you know that it doesn't really work like that, right? There's an ebb and flow nature of YouTube, and your numbers are down sometimes and they're up other times. And but yeah, no, I appreciate that a lot. I'm really fortunate, man, to I have a really cool audience too. That's another thing as well. I've been on some programs where people did not like what I had to say, and I got like death threats. Like I've seen chats of other communities, especially like streaming communities, like online debate stuff, and it's unbelievably weirdly cynical and brutal. And I'm actually really fortunate. None of my audience is like that. Even if someone comes in and they're like, if they contend with things in good faith, everyone's kind to each other, and that's so fucking cool to me. I'm thankful for that as well.
Well, I think your approach basically invites that type of person. That is to say, like a not toxic person, someone looking to kind of, like you say, I don't know, expand their subjectivity.
Yeah, no, I hope so. That's definitely the goal, man. If there's one thing that's true, I was watching your thing on this is, I think you won on Destiny, and you think you were kind of critiquing yourself for nudging too much, getting caught up into the debate spectacle a little bit, if I'm understanding you correctly. And yeah, there's just a lot of that, right? There's so much of that, and dude, I got to be honest. I know a lot of people don't take this as seriously as I do. I take that very seriously. I actually think one of the more detrimental things that's going on the internet and left spaces is this platforming of cynicism and raw, like, infighting and just utter uncritical bullshit. Like, and it's in my mind really tragic. There's so much creative and cooperative potential on things like YouTube and the internet, and it's totally not there. Utter failure so far.
Yeah, it is really troublesome. And when I think about it from my perspective as a YouTuber, I think about, like, man, if I manipulated the algorithm in certain ways, I'm pretty sure I could like double the amount of subscribers I currently have just by sort of gaming the attention economy in the way that you see, the usual suspects do this sort of thing.
Absolutely. I like that. I like that word, attention economy. It's very true.
Yeah, because these things like infighting, like you say, it gets attention. Drama gets attention, right?
150%. It's so I have a little bit of a personal experience with that. No one on your channel or my channel is remotely interested in this sort of shit that goes on here with this channel. I used to be pretty decent friends with a YouTube people at the YouTube channel called the Vanguard, and they were very small when I first started. They very very small. The guy we didn't really talk whenever I was at university. He was in my political science program with me. He was a minor while I was a major, and he was a film major. And he started a YouTube channel. Then we started talking because he saw my YouTube channel. I was around a little bit longer than them, and they were tiny. And I always went on their program. I platformed them, helped them out, and slowly but surely, they're an online political commentary channel. Slowly but surely, what I noticed is like David Dole fucked in the ass by Jimmy Dore, and like that was their tag words, and like stuff like stuff like that. And I didn't actually put two and two together. I didn't really think about it. I thought it was like kind of milk toastly dumb. That's like I'm telling you, go to their channel, and that's what it says. And like all their videos are like that. And they started getting a lot of shit. They had Noam Chomsky on their program. And they were like, they asked Noam Chomsky about force the vote, and I couldn't imagine anything more embarrassing than that, but they did. And I'm sure you're familiar with the whole force the vote, stupid online bullshit, right? Yeah, stupid all around, just completely dumb and a waste of time. And people, a lot of journalists as well, very big name YouTubers were like totally calling them out on their bullshit correctly. Now, I was actually going to jump into their defense a little bit. I'm like, guys, even talking, like even rebutting, like talking about how like stupidly embarrassing it is to have Noam Chomsky on and talk about force the vote. Guys, let that be. I think that there's such a sort of back and forth nature of this, and I understand there's some irony with this. I'm naming them the Vanguard and shit. And anyways, I messaged them. And I was like, hey, I think you guys have their initial goal was to do a lot of really cool film stuff that's very creative, non-alienating political commentary, stuff like that. They wanted to do documentaries on activism, and they had this idea during when, like, I think the George Floyd stuff was going on. I think that is a beautiful idea. And they were getting a lot of hate. And I was like, I've been with them from the beginning. I was like, look, it's not my place to tell you how to make your content, whatever. But, I've been around this a little bit longer than you guys. If possible, I don't want to see you guys get an audience. Their audience is terribly toxic, toxic. I was like, I don't want you guys to get an audience where, these really fruitful and creative ideas fall on deaf ears. Oh my God. I couldn't have imagined the response that I got back from one of the guys. His name's Gavin. The other guy, Zach, who's on there, if anyone is watching this, who sees this, for all I know, everything that Zach said to me was very, very kind, very, very nice and authentic. And I don't have reason to believe that he was ever fake about any of the niceties and stuff like that. So definitely not the dude with the beard, but the other guy with the long hair. utter like, bro, our audience. I swear to God, it's the most mind-boggling. And I don't even care to like distance myself, like not name them or whatever, because it's the nature of how this shit goes. And he essentially told me getting shit was the point, and that like, bro, it essentially was like, dude, fuck the issues and fuck what we're doing. I don't care if it's like harmful to discourse. Our audience loves it, and our YouTube channel's growing. You should be happy for us. And it was not even like I was just trying to like, hey man, like let's try to, don't you care about moving something to a little bit more constructive and again, these ideas, these really cool ideas that you guys have initially to make a Sprinter van and go film documentaries across the country or do whatever. I think that's such a creative, awesome thing to do. That's very non-alienating and useful to a lot of people. But having Noam Chomsky on your fucking channel talk about force the vote, but that's all of YouTube right now. I've been, it's personal now because I've seen it. I've seen it happen. Right, YouTube channels are starting to go into this really weird online fetishized simulacrum of politics, right? Like some people don't realize
totally
talking about politics isn't politics. now that sort of happened with a channel that I was very close to, and it was very hurtful, honestly, in a lot of ways. I was actually pretty deeply hurt by that. So I was always very, very nice and tried to help them, and they didn't quite have the toxic online tinge in the beginning, but man, they've gotten really big because, or somewhat big because they've been fucking like talking about David Dole being a fucking lib sellout and shit. And but I hate that stuff, man. I'm diametrically opposed to that sort of way of talking about politics, right? It's not politics. Talking about politics isn't politics, but talking about politics can be useful. We're not doing it in a useful way. So not only is it happening on YouTube, I have a little bit of a personal experience with that with other smaller YouTube channels like ours, and it hurts. It sucks. It really. I take this shit to my soul. I feel it in my heart. So
yeah, I hear you. That whole force the vote thing in particular is a symptom of impotence on the left, I think.
Absolutely.
Just complete and total powerlessness, at least at the political level, at the level of like these political commentators arguing about this.
Absolutely.
I do tend to think the fact that Jimmy Dore is even on AOC's radar at all is an indication that like we're all fucked.
I'm with you there, man. I'm completely there. And you know, I'd like to say that there's a positive. I mean, but God, you're so right. I mean, like, fuck, dude. Yeah, we're utterly fucked. You're correct. I would like to think that, all right, if we're utterly fucked, we can't devolve into sort of a very core, quiet, inactive nihilism. Dude, I've been reading a lot of Spinoza lately, and this is where my headspace is at. I think Spinoza, what he says correctly is so true. I made a video about like not being happy, as happiness isn't the point, but Spinoza thinks like happiness or joy. I like to consider it with my language. I prefer joy. I think happiness is a very ideological word in today's world, but joy makes you a stronger, more active human being. And think about that real quick. When you are happy, when you are quote unquote happy or joyful, think about how more communicative you are, how like a little bit more of like an outgoing presence. You're an active human being who interacts with the world more presciently. And when you're unhappy or you're sad, that doesn't happen. So I think what's really important is not, oh my God, do not get bogged down into a sort of political nihilism where, oh my God, a doomerism where everything's bad. You know, man, life isn't just about political ideology and stuff. It is so important in my mind to enjoy those little fucking things. If there is a political ideology, I find this with Marxism quite a bit. I think there is a very core Marxism in so many ways is kind of a, you know, it's alive in a hauntology, if that makes sense for you, if
Totally.
you're familiar with Mark Fisher, right? It's or Derrida, like it's alive, but it's beyond the grave. It's not active anymore. And I'm sorry, I know that's going to piss a lot of Marxists off, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. Like go, you know, but don't get sucked into doomerism because things aren't going your way. Life is so much more than the ideological tendencies you subscribe to. Little things like, you know, what me and you are doing, talking, waking up in the morning, trying to have a cup of coffee. Maybe, God, if your job sucks, I understand. Trying to, you know, find little things that are beneficial and give meaning to your life. Because look, if you want to change the world and you want to do these things, you want to interact with the world, you absolutely cannot be bogged down by this sort of doomerism. Truly, I think the world is never so bad in a state where that sort of behavior or mindset is justified. I sort of think like this. For how bad stuff isn't so bad, if that makes sense. I know that some people are like, that's a really privileged take. I understand that. Stuff's bad. Stuff's not good. I get it. But for how bad things are, stuff actually, in some ways, when you separate yourself, isn't so bad. Like we have, like, there's a lot more that we have than I think what we catch on to. And so, look, I think only from that mindset can we address a lot of the negative shit that's going on. And online politics does not create that environment at all. I think relationship, interaction, art creates an environment where we can address problems.
Yeah, and two things here. I like what you say. I like what you said about like maybe making a distinction between this sort of pervasive ideological notion of happiness and something that is more simple, which is joy. I think maybe one of the distinctions would be like with joy, it's not like a permanent state. You find moments of joy in life.
Hmm.
And there's not that same amount of pressure when you ask the question, am I experiencing joy, than when you ask the question, am I happy? Because happy sort of implies like a permanence, which is totally impossible. You know, no one is happy
Right.
100% of the time. I sort of went through a phase in my life where I embraced nihilism, sort of coinciding with like True Detective. When that first season came out, you know, you had the protagonist, Rust Cole. He's kind of this sexy nihilist. And I read that the writer was influenced by Thomas Ligotti. Have you ever heard of him?
I haven't actually, but I do want to say I absolutely True Detective season 1 is arguably my favorite. Like, you know, all the seasons are different, so I consider them different TV shows. Probably my favorite TV show. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, season 1 is very good. I will say that.
Oh, so good.
But there is this sort of pitfall of this sort of romanticism even associated with nihilism that is put forth, you know, with Russ Cole's character towards the beginning of the season. I feel like they have a nice little character arc for him, which I remember I found to be unsatisfying at the time, but now in hindsight, I think it's appropriate. But anyway, I read that, the screenwriter for that show was influenced by nihilists like Thomas Ligotti. And, you know, Ligotti has a book called Conspiracy Against the Human Race, where he basically says that we should stop reproducing. Which is basically, you know, that's what Russ Cole says at the beginning in the pilot episode. Even he basically says we should stop reproducing and walk hand in hand into extinction. And it's sort of, like I said, I think it's more of an aesthetic than it is a coherent philosophy. But
the nice smoke a cigarette and look like the existential angst. Yeah,
exactly. I think okay, let's contrast that with someone like Zizek, whose take on happiness is pretty interesting. Why does it appeal to you?
Oh, so his sort of, well, okay, I'm a fan of social psychoanalysis, and I think Zizek really he's, if there's anything about Zizek that's true, he's sort of a social psychoanalyst. And I think Freud and people like Lacan and forms of psychoanalytic thought is really useful. It doesn't, you know, I read a wonderful research paper. I can plug it sometime if you're interested. Very good. I forget how much really good literature is in just mundane research papers on the internet. A guy was essentially talking about like the very ideological tendency to talk about psychoanalysis now, where psychoanalysis isn't scientific, thus we should throw it away. But psychoanalysis now is something even among academics have accepted that, okay, it's better as a theoretical terrain. And I think that's true, but that's not a bad thing, right? I think psychoanalysis can help explain sort of human behavior and sort of understanding. There's some cores to psychoanalysis. One being that we don't really want what we think that we want, and also that we don't really do what we totally think that we are doing. And when you get into a mindset of trying to analyze the forms of what's going on, not just the content, right? We think in terms of content, right? Analyzing, you know, this discussion we're having, if it's you know, good or bad, or, you know, are my points better than your, say we're like debating, my point's better than your points. Well, if we're having a debate, the way of looking at a debate, I think in a psychoanalytic tinge or a more useful tone is like, what's actually happening while we're debating? Well, what's happening while we're debating is we're partaking in a lot of weird ritualistic symbolic combat, right? We're showing that, look, this is the right way to operate, and the way to operate is through like verbal combat, and that's sort of what's happening there. It's not a interaction of ideas and shit. An interaction of ideas would be a less combative thing, but you know, when you're looking at the form, I think that's what psychoanalysis is really good at, and I think we need to look at frameworks and forms much more than the content of things. I know that sounds a little abstract and confusing to some, but I think you'll probably understand what I mean by that. And I think Zizek does that really well with happiness. He's like, look, man, like one thing, we don't really want to be happy. Like we think that we do. What we really want in a lot of ways is to do cool things, at least people who are not rabidly depressed, or we want to figure shit out. Figuring shit out requires a little bit of misery. It's not to say that you should be miserable or quote unquote, this unhappy or sad, but that really, like, God, what a mundane fucking life, right? To just accept a state of happiness and not, not a state of like almost like labor, like of like intellectual labor or figuring stuff out or of stimuli, right? I think Zizek and I think things like psychoanalysis are good with that in a theoretical way.
Yeah, and it's like like a constitutive feature of not being satisfied with something is that you are driven to make it better, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So I think in particular, the quote you highlighted in your video resonated with me with Zizek. But you have been fairly generous with your time. I don't want to keep you too long.
No problem.
Where can people find you?
So find me, Epoch Philosophy on YouTube. It's my YouTube channel. You can find that. Also, my Twitter and Instagram is just at Epoch Philosophy. Do that. Feel free to reach out. I try to respond to everyone. I know theory is a bit of a hard thing to do. It's very enriching. You have a really cool channel of applied theory in many ways, like your Disco Elysium video, which fucking love Disco Elysium so much. Beautiful game. Stuff like that, man, what we're talking about, like with happiness and joy, shit like that, like Disco Elysium, in my mind, art, God, it's so much more radical than fucking talking about politics on YouTube, don't you think? I find shit like that so much more important and constructive. Like that stuff, like that, man, that's what makes life worth living, if you ask me. It's not going on fucking YouTube and fucking talking about AOC, someone who's got so little power and shit like that. But anyways, sorry, I'm ranting. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, stuff like that. Feel free to reach out. I'll try to get back to you. Check out the YouTube channel, of course, too. But yeah, that's where.
For sure. Do you have anything you're working on you want to tease?
Oh, yeah, sure. Fuck it. I'm actually working on Mark Fisher's Ghost of My Life right now as we speak. So I'm going to make a video over like hauntology and lost futures and essentially kind of over an overview of his book, Ghost of My Life. So that's Mark Fisher's second work. Mark Fisher is primarily known for capitalist realism, absolutely beautiful book. I'm not sure if you've covered anything around capitalist realism on your channel, but one of the probably one of the more founding introductions into sort of postmodern thought relating to left approaches to like capitalism. It's a wonderfully beautiful, oh my god, and prescient books. But his second book is what I'm making a video on. And then other than that, I'm doing some Spinoza. I had an exclusive episode on my Patreon YouTube members for a little sort of podcast over Spinoza's Ethics that I just got done reading. And then we're going to be doing a video on Deleuze's book. So yeah, I just gave you my whole schedule. I don't typically do that, but you got it out of me, man.
Yeah, I tend to do that. I'm a good interviewer in that way. But that is very ambitious. I look forward to all of that. But I guess we'll leave it here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. It's a lot of fun. I got to say too, I've been on a number of programs. A lot of the times I talk to a lot of people who are very much into politics, and that's okay. Like I'm cool talk about politics in some lights. I really like that, you do interact with theory and stuff like that. It makes it a lot more easy and light, a little bit like playful and lighthearted. I feel like I can really talk about what I want to talk about. Dude, this is a lot of fun. You probably, this is probably one of my favorite interviews I've done with someone. So I appreciate you having me on.